Right, good morning everybody. It's Diane Cresswell here, hope you can all hear me. First of all, welcome to part one of the GMP training. I work with BioNow. We're a membership organisation for the life science sector in the UK, and we're also a partner in the Atlantic KET Med project. So for our training, there's still one or two people coming in, but given that we've got quite a bit to get through, we'll make a start. So first of all, I'm delighted to welcome Alistair Clark of Weaver Technical Solutions as our trainer today. Alistair has enjoyed a long career in product development, project leadership and management in medical devices and combination products at Sanofi Aventis, Pfizer and Teva. And Alistair has been working very closely with the Atlantic KET Med project to develop a GMP quality system for the delivery of technical support to companies within a GMP framework. So today, he's going to introduce the key documents that make up the quality management system. These are the quality manual, the access procedure, the document control procedure, and we will touch on the templates. These first three documents will be available on the website for you to look at as uncontrolled documents. I mean, they are part of the live quality system. Please enter any questions into the chat function as we go along, and there will be some Q&A breaks where we can answer those questions. So we plan to run straight through till 11:30 when this part one training will close. And as I said, the training materials will be available online at BioNow. I think you've got the links for those. So without any further introduction from myself, I'd like to hand over to Alistair Clark to begin the training.
Thank you very much, Diane. It's very good to be here with you today. So I'll just select my screen that So hopefully you'll be able to see the introduction slide there.
Alistair, we've got your notes slide there.
Right, okay.
That's it.
Okay. As you can see, my name's Alistair Clark. Thank you very much for the introduction, Diane. As she mentioned, I've worked in the industry for 30 years, primarily developing drug delivery devices, so complex technologies, and I've worked on both the innovative and generic side. Recently, I've been working with many different medical device technologies, and my core expertise is actually getting products to market. As Diane's actually mentioned, I'll explain what the system is, why it is that way as well, because I think that's really important, and it's one of the core principles of GMP, is actually understanding why you're doing something. And then we'll actually talk about how to actually get the QMS implemented. And then on Thursday, we'll actually do a deep dive into the templates, as they're the signpost for the quality management system, and following the templates will actually lead to appropriate compliance and records being generated. These are the topics I'll cover today, not in any particular order, but we'll run through all of those. And I should also say that for those of you who are interested in actually having a training record of this event, then there is a test which will just validate that you've actually attended, listened, and to some degree actually understood. And as Diane has actually mentioned, if you do have any questions, then please do add those to the chat. I will stop as time allows through the presentation just to actually pick up any questions. Quality systems are now present in most industries, and in a lot they're voluntary, but in medtech and pharma they're actually mandatory. So that means they are rules and they're governed at national and regional level. This system has been developed to conform to the standards and the regulations, and I'll explain a little bit about the difference between regulations or rules that you must follow and the standards that can be voluntary. And it has to be implemented in your projects and then followed. And if it's applied correctly, the system will make sure that your produce and your products are safe and effective, and it will actually also generate the documentary evidence that you will need for the competent authorities here in Europe. So the system will identify any quality gaps in the projects and then define ways to fill those gaps. Each project can be different, and I can imagine will be different. You'll have different participants, and you'll be working on different products. And this is a challenge of actually creating a system that's that universal. But the system actually embodies GMP from pharma and also the medical device standard 13485. You can buy the book, and you can buy it locally. Your own national GMP standard will be available. The one that we've actually used is the English derived one from the MHRA. And of course, ISO 13485 2016 is available to download at a price from your standards providers. Effectively, there are two different types of quality systems. One is a very prescriptive system that defines exactly everything that has to be done. And then the other is what we actually have here, which is we work at a high level and we adapt to what needs to be done for each project. This requires a different sort of rigor in the projects, and you'll see that as we actually go through the slides. So this is a basic quality pyramid. I'm sure most of you have seen this before, where we actually define what the quality management system is at the top, the framework. Then we've actually got the key procedures and guidances that exist in the quality system. And then for the application of work with the equipment and facilities and resources that you actually have, we have much more detailed specific SOPs and work instructions, and then out of those is generated the records. And this is the context in which we're actually working. For those of you who have attended some of the previous meetings, you will actually remember this from the very first time we met. And this is the concept by which we're actually working. So actually defining what the requirements of the project are, what equipment you'll actually need. That moves into the access, and under the control of the access procedure, then you actually go through your development that you would actually need to do, identifying the risks, creating the various checklists, creating the documentation, for instance, device master record, which will lead to eventually your product being released. This is a view that actually bring those two pictures together in terms of the framework. So we've got the quality manual, policy, objectives, all of the things you'd actually have in a quality management system, and then the access procedure leading to what work will actually be done and defined, and then the various records created. And it's quite a nice comprehensive way of looking at it. This further shows you the context in which we're actually working. We're on the left-hand side in the grey. I don't expect you to read this. We've actually got SOPs. As you actually define your projects, that list will expand. And then in the red box, you've got the pharmaceutical aspects or the advanced medicinal therapy products. The system overview, which is really important in terms of if you're combining pharmaceuticals, devices, and advanced therapy, be that tissues, genetic modifications, or whatever. So it's very important to actually take an overall view from a quality perspective. And out of this picture, we'll create the facility control, material control, and various other aspects that are needed. But why are we doing this? The next few slides will actually just cement the context we're actually working in here. This is the landscape. So we've actually got the medical devices, the medicinal products and combination products, and the advanced therapy medicinal products. So you can actually see some examples, real examples that exist out there in the world, from the application of apps, to very, very simple medical devices to the much more complex and challenging advanced therapy area. This slide gives a very brief list of the history. With the quality and regulatory environment, it evolves continually, and we can see that globally. One of the biggest changes that we've actually seen in Europe is the change from the directives to the regulations on the medical device and the IVD perspective, but also in America. We can see that the FDA have adopted 13485 as the means for a medical device demonstrating that you're compliant with 21 CFR 820.3 design controls. So it is evolving as time goes on. It's one of those things that you have to continually watch. Those are two relevant standards. Where authorities actually point to those, then you can actually show conformity to these standards is also compliance with your regulations. And then at the end of your processes, hopefully this is what you will actually be doing, is achieving approval either locally or regionally or even in countries abroad. But what are the essential GMP aspects? And the list here runs down through what you will need to do to actually demonstrate compliance with GMP. And GMP is generally embodied in law in each of the countries you're actually working in. So these are rules that you have to follow. The principles apply equally to the advanced medicinal therapy products and devices and pharmaceuticals. And one of the things that GMP requires you to do is actually validate training. So you validate your process, but you also validate training, hence the little test at the end. It is required for material that will actually be used on humans, be it in clinic or later once it's approved by the competent authority. And you have to define each of the aspects that are actually listed on the slide there, including management responsibilities. So as a group of people, what do you have to do? They do, it does actually state that you can actually size your quality management system for the company situation. And this is what we've actually done with the Atlantic KET Med project. So what does that mean in terms of the essentials? Well, it is applicable to all stages. And now with the change to the MDR, it applies to all medical devices as well. It's only for use with material that's made in accordance with GMP. It covers the transfer. So if something's actually made in one site, then GMP has to be applied to the transfer process. All manufacturing processes are covered. Critical steps must be validated. So it's important to actually identify what those critical steps are. All necessary facilities should be GMP. But if you don't have a quality management system locally, then that can be actually dealt with by the templates and actually making sure that there are appropriate procedures put in place locally and perhaps in a temporary manner. Instructions and procedures should be written in an instructional form, and the procedures should be carried out correctly, and you can validate that training as you actually go through. Records that come out of the system will demonstrate the quality, the quantity and quality of the product is good and that the product has been created correctly. So this further means that deviations must be managed, there needs to be traceability, distribution needs to be considered and controlled, and whenever your product's either in the clinic or actually on the marketplace, there needs to be a means of actually recalling it from use. And you'll, I'm sure many of you remember that Apple put a medical device onto the market without appropriate approvals. And one of the interesting conversations I had with the FDA was, how do you actually recall that from the marketplace? So with software systems, you really need to build into it something that will allow you to switch the software off, effectively recall it from the market. Complaints, very important in terms of either complaints from customers or adverse events, and we've seen a few of those happening recently, and those were events that actually triggered the change of directive to regulation. So compliers, to comply with GMP, these are what you need to do from a clinical perspective, or if you're actually importing, a manufacturer's import authorization requires you to actually do the same thing. All of these aspects need to be identified and managed in your projects. So then, in summary, how does the quality framework drive GMP and compliance with GMP? Well, it does that by first bringing forethought to the situation, and you'll see that from the templates as we talk about those in detail on Thursday. It actually defines what the product is you're developing, it defines the development, and it defines what you produce at the end of the development. And it also creates the controls, the critical quality attributes, and the essential performance requirements of your medical devices that you need to demonstrate, usually by test method. And you also need to show that you're continuously improving your quality management system. So it's not okay just to drop something in and then let it run. You need to actually set up quality objectives that allow you to examine what you're actually doing. So for instance, in a project that you might be running within the consortium, you can actually define what the quality objectives are, and then you can measure those as you actually go through the project. Are you actually doing what you said you were doing? Are you getting feedback from perhaps a particular facility where they've needed to improve their sterilization process, for instance? And then, of course, what it drives is the very most important aspect of your quality management system are the records, the evidence that you've actually done what you said you're going to do, and the product is delivered appropriately. This is just a summary of how the competent authorities view the functionality of a product quality management system. So you'll see other things that I haven't mentioned yet. So self-inspection, quality audit, QP controlled batch release, monitoring the effect of change, many things that have to be built into your projects to ensure that you're actually compliant. And alongside those, we have the very top level controls that you would need to apply. So defining it in a quality manual, which defines your quality policy, the responsibility of those managers that are working with you, document control. All these aspects are part of the functionality of a quality management system. Just a few observations about GMP before we actually move into more detail. It does not address the safety aspects for personnel engaged in manufacturing. That's something that should be done locally. Nor does it constrain how you develop innovative projects and products. It's defined at global, regional, and national levels, and it's important that wherever you're working that you're aware of those. And GMP is one of only a number of good practices. So you get good distribution practice, good laboratory practice, good clinical practice, and good pharmacovigilance practice. They're all rolled up under the GMP umbrella, and they all apply to your projects. So what is the quality management system that we've actually got? This is a picture of how it looks. You will have the links to actually go into project admin to actually find the various pieces of information that you require to actually generate for each project all of the documentation that you need. The quality manuals is there, the access procedures, how to control your documents, and the templates to actually guide you through each project. So that's just a picture at a certain point in time in terms of where the tools are. So you can actually go and find those afterwards. So I'm just going to stop there just for a second, take a quick drink of coffee and ask if there are any questions up to this point. Are there any questions in the chat?
Hi, Alistair. There's no questions in the chat so far, but I've got one. Just briefly, what is the difference between GMP and ISO 13485? Because I know in the past I've come across companies that just had GMP.
GMP has been specifically written for the pharmaceutical industry, and 13485 has been written specifically for medical devices. The reality of the situation is that they're both quality management systems. And what we've actually done for the KETMed situation is bring the two together. If you remember the landscape slide, you'll remember the three colored areas where you've actually got medical devices, the medicinal products, or combination products as the Americans call them, and then the new advanced medicinal therapy products. So this covers all of them. In industry, what normally happens is that where you've actually got a company that's developing the complex products, you get two sub-quality systems that exist side by side, and often it's the agency or the competent authorities that have to actually see the overview. But it's best whenever they actually work together. Does that answer your question, Diane?
That's excellent. That's great. We've got another question from Miguel at NASA's Biotech. He's asking, when is the best moment in the development of medical device to set up the QMS? Is it when approaching the initial clinical trial, when arriving into the market, or at the preclinical level to avoid any potential bottleneck downstream?
Thank you for the question, Miguel. For me, your last suggestion is the best one, which is preclinical. The more preparation you can do before you actually start your clinical work is the very best approach. If you're involved in technology that does not require use on humans, then it is possible to leave the implementation of a quality system later. I think it's fair to say that competent authorities would prefer you didn't do that. And I know that the agency in America takes a very dim view of that sort of approach. Basically, the best way to think of it is if you're doing research, then that's probably best done outside or in an unregulated area or way. But as soon as your research is actually going in towards human use, you're really defining what the research is actually turning into from a product and process perspective. That's absolutely the best time. So if you've got a quality management system in place that will allow you to take that research and put it into your clinical development process, that's absolutely the best way to do it. Any other questions?
No, there's no more questions at the moment, so maybe we'll just move on.
Okay. So now we'll actually very quickly run through the quality manual. It's there for you to read. It is a document with lots of text in it. Those of you who are familiar with 9001 and 13485 and other related quality management systems will recognize the content. It's very similar, as you might imagine, using ISO standards as the core. So this is what it looks like. And I'll actually take you through the sections bit by bit. And really the first part is the purpose. So why is it there? The first thing to recognize is that it's there for all projects to use. Like all the documents, if your project demands a different scope, then it's there to be individualized and adapted so that under change control, then you run your projects according to your updated quality manual. It could be that your org structure is different, or you have a very specific way of developing the product for technical or logistic reasons. And that's what competent authorities like to see, is that the quality management system and the quality manual is continually adapted to what your situation is. And this is what it's for. It's to ensure adequate oversight and control of all the pharmaceutical medical device regulated activities. So to the previous question, it's there to ensure that you're actually doing the right things before you actually find yourself doing them. The QMS applies to all the work done by the consortium for products used on humans in clinical investigations or after approval. GMP is mandatory, and I will keep saying this all the way through the presentations today and on Thursday. It does not have to be applied to the non-human use research or the feasibility work, as I was just previously saying. This is a list of the roles within the project consortium, and you have to actually define who's actually doing this. Each participant has equipment and processes that will be used to manufacture, inspect, and test product created within the various facilities you have. Due to the multitudinous possible products and part products that may be produced within the project, the roles will be defined for each project. Each project team will use the templates to guide the creation and collection of records that are required to provide this evidence that the project has identified what the product is, how it will be made, what the equipment is required to make it, that it's been prepared appropriately, the risk inherent in the product and the manufacturing processes, how these risks have been mitigated or accepted. Roles and responsibilities are actually defined within each project and project team, and there should be adequate definition of how the activities are actually completed. So these are the activities or responsibilities and activities that need to be defined. And the list continues in terms of, from a regulatory submission perspective, what will actually be submitted, who's actually in control of that, how is it going to be created, your statutory obligations as well in terms of legal, health and safety aspects, management responsibility, what is that, how will the management review actually be conducted, validation, very, very important for demonstrating that you've actually got control. And this is a particular challenge within the clinical environment where whenever you're actually producing very, very low numbers, and this is where appropriate risk management is required and appropriate processes design and development is required to actually demonstrate that a product is appropriate for use. Defining your material, who's actually responsible for the materials. Perhaps you're actually buying product in, who does that, how is it controlled, all the training on your facilities, equipment and product. Deviations, traceability, distribution, complaints, as I've mentioned before, these are all things that have to be defined in terms of who's doing them. The quality manual is written does actually address the needs of the needs of both the pharmaceutical quality system and the medical device quality management system as well. So it's somewhat unique in that, and that speaks really to the question that Diane asked earlier about what's the difference between GMP and 13485. Just a reminder that this is the framework in which we're working. So the why and the how at the top, the access procedures to how do you use the equipment, and then the very specific process and work instructions. And the pyramid base is, of course, the records that are used to demonstrate compliance with GMP and regulations. A reminder of the context that you've actually seen, and that this has led to the generation of the procedures, which will be added to as time goes on and the projects actually run. The key ones being documentation, record keeping, and the access procedure itself. This is an example project just to actually demonstrate the situations you may find yourselves in within the projects. So you have an external partner, you may have a couple of KETMed organizations involved, and you could be providing material to an external clinical partner. Wrapping a quality management system around that using the admin project system will ensure that any QMS gaps are actually identified. So you will actually look at the various participants, what they're doing, and then actually work out what processes and procedures, effectively, how you will get access to those facilities and expertise to deliver the product that you need. So how does this happen? We'll talk in detail about the templates on Thursday. The very first template that you'll use is a project initiation template. It defines the project and the QMS required and where that would be required. As I mentioned earlier, there may be a drop-in series of SOPs to actually control some equipment. And then other templates that are actually defined, and those will be shown to you in just a few minutes, will be used as required to fulfill the project that you're actually doing. So it's very specific to your project. It will define the project organization, who does what, the material and documentation control, product and process requirements, risk management, specifications, and the records actually being created. The templates provide the signpost through the project. A reminder of the overall key records and procedures that may be required. And now on to management responsibility. Management are responsible for the success of the Atlantic KET Med projects shall provide commitment to the development and implementation of the quality management system and the maintenance of its effectiveness by communicating to the supporting organizations the importance of meeting customer as well as regulatory requirements, establishing a quality policy, ensuring that quality objectives are defined, conducting management reviews, and ensuring there is available resource. And that last point can't be underestimated in its importance. The quality policy is there. This is what it states at the moment. It's written specifically for your projects. It's something that should be owned by the whole team that's working from the top up. And this, of course, can be adapted like any of the quality management system that exists. A quality plan is something that actually defines the specific quality standards, practices, resources, specifications, and sequence of activities related to your particular project, the organization objectives, its processes, the allocation of resources and responsibilities. These are all aspects that can be included in your quality plan, including those metrics in terms of measuring whether your project is actually running to quality plan. Resource management, what is needed to implement both your projects, but also the quality management system itself. The right resource with the right knowledge and skills, the right equipment, environment, and control over the environment and equipment. One topic jumps out time and again, and sterility, ensuring people have appropriate training in the requirements, the appropriate microbiology, access to laboratories and so on. This is all defined within the resource management aspect of your quality management system. Product realization, so your development, your R&D effort, really involves creating a plan, customer related processes. If you're actually working with external client companies, how do you engage with those, having appropriate agreements in place, how the design and development is actually done, how you do purchasing, production and service provision. If you have a piece of equipment that goes into a client area, how will that be maintained? How will the service be provided? How will control of your monitoring and measuring equipment? For instance, if you have to measure the size of some of your products, how will it actually be done? What calibration is required? What validation of your method is required? These are all aspects that must be defined in your product realization. Conformity of product, foremost in terms of putting product into humans, conformity of the quality management system, and effectiveness of the quality management system is defined in your quality manual, and how you actually apply that to your projects. So it points to the product, the process, and the quality management system. So having just talked about the quality management, or the quality manual rather, I'll just ask if there are any more questions for the trainer.
There's no more questions at the moment in the chat. I think everyone's just taking quite a lot in.
Okay, there is a lot to hear and understand, in which case I'll just move on to the access procedure. So just a reminder of where we are in the context of the quality management system. So we've actually got your quality system defined as the pyramid here. How that's actually embodied within the Atlantic KET Med system, the sorts of records and SOPs that you're going to have, and then on the right hand side here is your access procedure and the flowchart from that access procedure and the guideline that's been written to help you steer your way through each of your projects. So it defines how the KETMed project teams will define, plan, and implement your projects. It ensures that your participants and material required for the project have appropriate quality, and you will make the appropriate records. The scope of the access procedure applies to all work done on humans, and it does not need to apply to non-human research or feasibility activities. So you may have some equipment that's used in two different ways. There may be a series of activities that you would need to do to that facility, environment, and equipment to actually get it to a GMP compliant state. Then you can use it for your human use. And that's something that you can define using your access procedure. It defines the responsibilities of the management, the partners, and the project team. And where a partner organization is not able to conform to this, a risk assessment can be used. And when appropriate mitigations are identified and made possible, then the project can continue. That's really the key to the use of the templates, is to define what's required from the quality perspective as you go through your project. Allocate resource and equipment, implementing it and reviewing as you actually go through it, and recording. Those are the four key steps as you actually run through the access procedure. I love this slide because it just gives you in one picture an overview of very much the records that you'll actually create, and it provides a very nice context for the work that you'll actually be doing. So I'll actually run through an overview now of the access procedure. So this is how you will actually get access into the Atlantic KET Med facilities equipment and use them for your projects to create the material that you will actually need to do. It'll culminate in a product file that will actually contain the device, pharmaceutical or advanced therapy medicinal product information that's required to actually demonstrate that you've actually conformed to those specifications that you've created as you've done your development. It will also help you create your product-backed certification, which would be approved by your quality person within whatever project you're running. So from a higher level perspective, I'm mapping on this slide the four main stages of each project. So the defining, the developing, and the specifying, and then the producing and release. And that's how the access procedure and guideline moves through the process that you've actually got. So with the following slides, it just dives into detail of what's actually happening. So this is your define part. So your project initiation record is used to actually work out what the project is going to be, what external organizations you're going to use, what the clinical plan is, what's going to be made where. At the initiation of the project, you'll identify the team, roles and responsibilities, and then that will actually lead into defining what the product is, how it's actually made, what the risks are that you actually have. And I've listed some of the different ways which you should be actually conducting your risk assessments and your compliance and conformity to those requirements. So you should be saying, and we've actually got a couple of case studies that hopefully we'll have some time for on Thursday. And there's one of them actually has a fantastic list of standards that can apply to a particular advanced therapy that's actually marketed at the moment. It's approved and marketed. It covered 4 pages in tabular form to actually define what that particular advanced medicinal therapy product actually had to conform to from a standard perspective. So that's your constituent parts, the process, the risk, and the compliance and conformity. This is then converted into your planning and your doing, and as with all quality systems, the review of your product, what your plans are, the identification of mitigations, making sure that your project is running correctly. And then this is where you're actually placing your work orders, so getting the product actually made, which may involve different means and different methods of manufacture, and getting to the point where you can place the order for the final product that's going to be made. That will then be reviewed very much as per the previous review. 13485 requires you to do at least one design review through your development process. And then as you're actually creating your product, you will generate your device history record and your pharma master batch record, which will give you your product batch certification at the end of that process, which will then be QP reviewed and released. A reminder of the quality pyramid, the context of the access procedures, where they sit in terms of a high level that allows you to define the processes and procedures to give you access to the equipment that's required, and then the records that you'll actually generate through your process. Again, just a reminder of the context of the Atlantic KET Med situation. The access procedures are key to ensure that GMP is followed in each of your projects. And a reminder of the templates and their use and importance throughout this quality management system. So again, I'll stop, have another drink of coffee and ask if there are any more questions.
Right, has anybody got any questions? I personally, I quite like the flow chart and the way you've taken us through, you know, from start to finish, the access procedure, and it highlights some of the templates that you have to fill in as you go. And having looked at these myself, I know that makes the sort of definition of what you have to do quite a lot easier when you actually try to do it. So.
The great beauty of quality management system is you start with the end in mind, in terms of, you know, that at some point your QP, your quality person, will actually have the records, the manufacturing records, to actually review and approve before the material can be used. And the access procedures are just the journey that a development organization or consortium will actually undertake to actually get to that point. So I think it's just a really nice way of thinking about this journey that each of the project teams will actually undertake. And the very exciting thing, certainly from my perspective, is that actually they're all going to be very different, producing really interesting products.
We've got a question from David. If we are manufacturing prototypes at the feasibility stage, do we need to follow this?
At the feasibility stage, no. If your prototypes then go on to be used in a human, for instance, implanted, and that's one of the case studies that we'll actually talk about on Thursday, then moving from the feasibility, whenever you're actually making something, testing it in vitro in the laboratory to check its functionality, this doesn't need to be in place. You don't need to be following GMP to actually do that. But as soon as you move over to this is going to be used in a human, that's where the quality management system must be applied. So if you're not using or not certified to 13485, perhaps you've got a very limited number of SOPs, that's where the templates will actually allow you to identify what those gaps are. And then based on what the requirements are from a clinical perspective, you'll actually define how you would do that manufacture, what the risks are, you'd mitigate those risks, you create the appropriate records, the appropriate validations, measurements, and so on. So these templates will allow you to actually take something that may not normally be done in such a pharmaceutical way, for want of a better expression, and use it for the purpose that's intended within the project. Hopefully that'll help. Anything else?
Another question from Jared in Ireland. In practical terms, is there any simple document file type that can help us practice the access procedure? A spreadsheet or a Word file?
I won't answer that one now. I'll actually come back to that one if I can, Jared. And the reason is, I think it depends on what the project is. One, I would actually look to the end in terms of thinking about how you're going to present the information. And some companies convert all of the documents to PDF, for instance, so that there's a way of actually remotely signing all their documents, and it's fairly readily easy to upload the records to an authority, providing appropriate documentation standards are actually made. But I'll come back to that, and I'll think about that question as I'm actually going through even the next section, which is about document control. some organizations are very prescriptive about how their records are created, and the system in which they're actually stored and archived, and then compiled for submission for the regulatory authority. So from my perspective, that's something that would, again, from a project initiation, starting with the end in mind, if you know that you're going to have a CTA or an IND, then you will want to actually set your documentation up in a particular way that will facilitate it. Having said that, if your records are valid, then they can be in any form that you deem appropriate. But I will keep coming back to that. Any other questions, Diane?
No, there's nothing more at the moment, so maybe we'll move on.
Yep. So I'll just touch on document control briefly. There is a procedure here that describes how each project team shall control documents. Now, I've used the word shall, so that means you have to do this. However, the means by which you do this, of course, as I've said before, it's a flexible quality management system. Define how you want to do it and actually follow it. Here we actually have a procedure that will allow you to actually start within your projects to actually create your documents and create your records. And then as you actually develop how the team works, then come back and actually update the document control as you need to. So the definitions here, this is actually one of these things which after the training, come back and read this slide. It's really important to actually understand what a document is and what a record is. The most important thing is that once a record has been created, it cannot be changed. It's a bit like banking. One of my clients actually is a banker, and he works in the healthcare environment, and he's brought his immutable record standards from the banking industry, and he's applied it in the healthcare setting, which is absolutely fantastic. And that's absolutely the way to consider it. So just as there must be no errors on your statement, your bank statement, so it is your bank statement of that date is your bank statement. However, if you spend some money, then the bank statement from the following week will of course be different. So if errors are noticed, then that record stays as it is, and then you will create a new record through your version control or whatever means you deem fit for that. What the record is a historical evidence of what you've actually done. And that's a very, very important distinction. And it's one of those aspects that, and there are fewer of these folk about now, but people who have not been using quality management systems, this is one of the difficulties that they have in terms of mindset shift from just creating a document and then continually actually changing it to creating a series of records. And what that does is it allows you to apply control. So there are responsibilities in terms of what the author has to do, the reviewer, the approver, they're all defined here. And the project team shall ensure that the changes to the documents are reviewed and approved, either by the original appropriate function or by another designated function that has access to the pertinent background information. This makes your documents and your records valid. And that's one of the things that the competent authorities do whenever they do audits, is they actually look at your training records of your staff to actually ensure that those people who are actually reviewing particular documents and approving them have the appropriate skills and knowledge to actually do that. And that's one of those things that within your projects you need to be thinking about as you're doing the initiation of your projects. So the authors should be assigned by the project team. They complete a draft. The author will obtain the review, they will obtain the approval, and they will store the document appropriately wherever you deem fit. The procedure overview here, just to summarize, that you have an author, a reviewer, an approver. These will be assigned. They should be created. The document should be created with a unique identifier, and the identifier will be assigned by the document coordinator within your project. The product specification design history files will consist of indexes that will allow you to actually retrieve these records in a very timely way. I once found myself sitting in Eastern Europe with an FDA inspector, and the design history file was actually sitting right in the middle of America. And what we actually had to do was actually organize a time shift for those people working in America, but the design history file was there. The inspector was calling out documents he wanted to see, so we were able to actually get them sent as PDFs and presented to the authority in a very timely manner. That's the sort of level of performance that you need to be actually looking towards within each of your projects. The documents required, as I described earlier, to support a submission. They should be stored in the product file or the product specification file from the pharmaceutical perspective, or the medical device history file relating to that project. And as to Gerard's question from before, within KETMed, the current document or electronic record of choice is using the Microsoft Office applications, but they can actually come from different sources. There's absolutely no point, there's no value in making somebody who's working with Google Docs actually work with something else. It doesn't add any value, but what has to be done is that document that they're actually creating must be valid, so that whenever an inspector comes to review that they can actually see that the document has followed this document control process. And I'll stop just at that point and ask if there are any more questions.
Right, has anyone got any questions or comments on document control?
And in fact, we've come to the end of the slides for today. I particularly like the next slide. So I can take questions on any aspect of what you've actually heard so far this morning.
I'll ask a question to the audience. How many of you have got any experience of working with any sort of quality system? If you just type into the chat, yes or no, or maybe just yes. Okay, David has. Is that David? Which David is that? Okay, Nasa Janati has, yeah, David Bogg. Anna Texera at INL has got involvement. Gerard hasn't yet, that's why he's here today.
He has now.
Okay, so it sounds like this is all pretty new to most of us, so it's maybe not surprising you don't have too many questions at this point. We do have a little bit more time today, though. If I don't know if anybody wants to maybe speak. We can unmute the microphones if anybody wants to speak to Alistair. Okay, David asked a question. He has to leave the meeting now, but thanks you very much for a comprehensive presentation. I mean, there is a lot here. What we've done is put the documents online as uncontrolled copies. we've just been learning about document control and how important it is. So yesterday I decided I would upload the procedures as uncontrolled copies, so they're watermarked as such. They're PDFs, and they'll be available to you after the meeting at BioNow. So just to start to establish that discipline about document control, which is probably one of the first things to get your head around, really, having done ISO 9000 in the past. Have any of us on this call today started working with the AKM quality system? If you could just answer in the chat. I know I have. I've raised a couple of project initiation records, and I found that that worked very well. So people are answering now. Ian's had a go with it. Delith has started that as well. Delith at STFC. Ian McCabe obviously is you know, a part of our project leadership team at NUIG. I can't see any more questions coming in, Alistair, so I don't know if you've got any other words of advice or wisdom for people to consider.
It's having a quality management system is there to ensure safe and effective products. It also will look after you in terms of the work you're actually doing. So it's very worthwhile investing in that mindset shift from effectively, yeah, that's a good point, Jeff. I'll just shift to this as well. So as you're actually doing that mindset shift to a quality management system, then just bear the key principles that we've actually talked about today as you're actually going through this. It's something that will allow you to demonstrate the effectiveness of your work, and it's something that it requires time and effort, and sometimes ingenuity, but it's very worthwhile. It's a very rewarding thing to do. As part of my work now in industry, I occasionally help due diligence exercises, and I'm doing one at the moment, and it's really interesting to see that particular company, how they've actually set the quality management system up, and where you've actually got that traceability from your initiation documentation through requirements, through the development, and then through the verification and validation testing that you might do with your product. Is very nice to actually see that story actually being told. And as we go into the next session on Thursday, you'll actually see the context of how these documents fit around the quality system. And as the man standing over the question mark is indicating, if you wish to have this training session validated, there is a very short test. There's only 10 questions, but that will validate that you've actually attended, watched, and or read afterwards the information, and I'll be very happy. As part of my duty, I will mark those tests, and if you have misunderstood something, then we will actually contact you and make sure that that misunderstanding has been corrected, and get you to a point where you've got a nice record that actually says you've done the training, you understand the system, and here's the evidence. So we will create those records for you. And certainly from my perspective, that's all I had today.
Okay, so we've got some further information there. Any of you who haven't looked on the Atlantic KET Med website recently, the link is there. Do keep your eye on that. There's quite a lot more content will be going up there in the next weeks and months. I think that's all I've got to say really today. We have got the follow-up session on Thursday. So I hope you've all registered for that. If you haven't, then please do register. Where we will, on Thursday, we will actually go through the templates in detail, and we'll also have a bit more interaction, and we'll break out into smaller rooms so we can discuss things in an easier format. So in the interest of time, if there are no further questions, or there is a question here from Jared. Should we do the test before Thursday? Or do them both together at the end?
It's probably worth doing it before Thursday, but it doesn't have to be. You can actually do them both afterwards if need be. All they're there to do is actually validate that you've attended, you've understood, and to give you the chance to add that to your training record. So just even in these COVID times when we're not traveling quite as much as we used to, people seem to be just as busy. So I do understand the pressure on time.
Okay, well, I can't see any more questions coming in. If you think of any questions afterwards, please, drop me a line, copy and Alistair, and we'll make sure that you get an answer to that. There's no such thing as a silly question in this. It's quite a complex field, and it's not an area in our businesses that we can ignore forever. Because as Alistair said, eventually you're going to want to do some tests on your products in human use, in which case you're going to have the whole system ready and working. So by getting an early start now and beginning to change the mindset within your organizations, you're actually saving yourselves from quite a bit of pain and anguish later on, I would suggest, in terms of getting an early start now while there's no inspector, looking over your shoulder. The gesture sent a message there. All the materials will be available in the event area of the BINO website shortly. We're all looking forward to the next session on Thursday. So if there's no more comments, I haven't got anything more to add today. I'd just like to thank Alistair very deeply for all the work he's gone into to try and explain very complex system to us, and then that will obviously be to the benefit of all the companies in the Atlantic KET Med project.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to create the system, and I'm also really interested to see how the system works and develops over time.